In this video, we're going to be talking about graphing circles. Okay, so first off, if we want to graph this one, it's easier to plug numbers into y squared and get my x answer out because we're just squaring instead of having to square root and solve. So we're going to plug some different numbers in. So when I plug -3 in, -3 squared gets me 9. -2 squared gets me 4. -1 times -1 is 1. 0 times 0 is 0. 1 times 1 is 1. 2 times 2 is 4. 3 times 3 is 9. So if I graph these, write 9 down 3, write 9 up 3, write 4 down 2, write 4 up 2, write 1 down 1, write 1 up 1, and then 0, 0. So it's kind of like a parabola turned sideways. Okay, if we go ahead and graph this one over here, we need to plug some values into this. So let's go ahead and get x by itself. So I'm going to subtract y squared, get x squared equals -y squared plus 25. Opposite of squaring is square rooting. So x equals the square root of -y squared plus 25. Okay, so if I plug, let's say -1 in there, it would be y equals the square root of -1. I guess we could plug in a negative or a positive 1 squared plus 25. Well, 1 squared gets me 1, but there's a negative out front, so it's going to be really -1 plus 25, which gets me the square root of 24, which is not a pretty answer. So we have to be picky about what we put in for this y squared to get pretty answers out instead of ugly decimals. Okay, so some options here. If I wanted to plug in 5 squared gets me 25. The negative out front makes it -25. Plus 25 gets me 0. If I plug in -5, it will be the exact same thing because I'm squaring it, and that negative sits on the outside. Okay, and the other thing that I could plug in is 0. 0 squared is 0. 0 plus 25 is 25. The square root of 25 is positive and -5. So I'm going to go ahead and graph this. So I go 0 up 5, 0 down 5, right 5, left 5. So this is kind of our basic circle equation right here. Okay, so we already did number 2. So describe stating the domain and range. So we're going to zoom in. Let's do our domain and range. So the farthest left he goes is 0. And he goes to positive infinity. The furthest down he goes, because it keeps going, is -infinity. The furthest up is positive infinity, so all real numbers. My next one over here, furthest left he goes is -5. Furthest right he goes is 5. Furthest down is -5. Furthest up is 5. Okay, so that is your domain and range. How are these two relationships different from all the other ones we're graphing? These aren't functions. They don't pass my vertical line test. Okay, how can we rewrite this so we can graph it? Well, we always need it in y equals form. So if I take this first one, the opposite of squaring is square rooting. So I square root both sides, but when I solve and square root, there is a positive and a negative side to it. So that gets us the top and bottom of that parabola turned sideways. Okay, so when I solve this one, we're going to subtract x squared, get y squared equals, you could have 25 minus x squared or the other way around. If you're typing in your graph calculator, it won't matter. Opposite of squaring is square rooting, but my answer has to have a plus or minus in it to get that top of my circle and that bottom of my circle. Okay, so if you graph those in a graphing calculator, you would be able to see how they would match. Okay. So our circle is a set of all points in a plane that are equidistant from a given point in the plane called the center. Okay, so we have the center of our circle, and to make a circle, we have all these points that are equal distance to the outside. That's what makes up our circle. So we actually have billions of points out here. away from the center that are equal distance apart. That makes us our circle. Okay, so our equation is going to be x minus h squared plus y minus k squared equals r squared. R is going to be that radius. HK are going to be the coordinates of your circle. And this one's trickier than the other ones because we flip both our H and our K when we put it in or take it out. So you've got to flip both of them. Okay. What was the radius of our original one that we graphed? So from the center to the outside, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. So my radius was 5 and my center was 0, 0. How is the radius of the circle related to the equation? It is the square root of whatever is in the back end of your equation. So you take the square root of that to get your radius. Okay, what would the equation of a circle be if it has a center of this and the radius of 10? So we're going to plug it in, but you have to flip both of them when you plug it in. So x minus 5. It was positive, it switches to negative. And y plus 7. And then when we plug our r squared in, it becomes 10 squared. The only one I need to simplify is going to be that 10 squared, which gets me 100. Okay, so my next one, we got x minus 5 squared plus y plus 7 squared equals, my radius is 20 this time, so 20 squared, which gets me 400 this time. Okay, and then we already talked about the connection of HK, so that's my original equation that I put up there. Okay, so this is if we go the opposite direction. So we still flip them when we take it out, so this negative 3 becomes a positive 3, this 7 becomes a negative 7, and we were squaring when we put it in, well, we have to do the opposite to take it out, so we need to square root that to get my radius. Okay, write an equation of a circle by moving it right 3, down 5, radius 6. Okay, so left and right is going to be where my x is, because that's my x-axis. Up and down is going to be my y-axis. So that's where we're going to be plugging them in. So it's always the opposite of what you think. So right, you think positive, but this one's actually going to be minus 3. And then down, you would think negative, but you have to do the opposite. So it's going to be plus 5. And we have both of those squareds, and it's equal to my radius squared. Well, 6 squared, when I put it in, will change to 36. Okay, let's say we were graphing x minus 1 squared plus y minus 2 squared equals 4 squared, or 4. Okay, if we're graphing, so I take the point out, it becomes 1, 2. That's the center. We square root this to get the radius out of 2. So on my graph, I would go right 1, up 2, and then I would go out 2 each direction. So I would go up 2, I would go right 2, I would go left 2, and I would go down 2, and that's how you would make your circle. So that's kind of how you'd work the radius. So you put your center, and then go up, left, right, and down 2 each direction.